Hello, everyone. Welcome wherever you may be zooming in from, whether it is morning, evening, afternoon. I guess technically we're not even on Zoom. We're on YouTube and Facebook live stream, but none of that matters. It's a pandemic. We're just doing what we can. But so excited to be able to be here today with our awesome speakers and to be able to bring you the final part of our SCU Listens and Learns series for this academic year at Santa Clara University. And before we get going, just to be able to do some more formal introductions, our SCU Listens and Learns Race, Reflection, and Renewal series is a Santa Clara University speaker series, which was designed to engage, inspire, and empower change. This series is sponsored by the following offices here at SCU: the Office of the President, the Office of the Provost, the College of Arts and Sciences, the Center for Arts and Humanities, the Office for Student Life, and the Office for Multicultural Learning, and the Office for Diversity and Inclusion. If you don't know me, I am Dr. Joanna Thompson, Director of the Office for Multicultural Learning, which also includes our Rainbow Resource Center here at SCU. My pronouns are she, her, hers, or they, them, theirs. And before we begin, usually with our programs here at Santa Clara, we do like to acknowledge the land that Santa Clara University sits on, the land of the Ohlone and Muwekma Ohlone people. So please feel free to listen along as I read out our land acknowledgement and we take a brief moment of silence. We pause to acknowledge that Santa Clara University sits on the land of the Ohlone and Muwekma Ohlone people who trace their ancestry through the missions Dolores, Santa Clara, and San Jose. We remember their connection to this region and give thanks for the opportunity to live, work, learn, and pray on their traditional homeland. Let us take a moment of silence to pay respect to their elders and to all Ohlone people of the past and present. Thank you. I'm so pleased to welcome our 4 distinguished guests that you see here joining us this afternoon, or again, evening, morning, wherever you may be joining us from. Today, we have Melissa DePino and Michelle Sahane, who witnessed 2 Black men be arrested for not buying a coffee in Philadelphia at a Starbucks and created the awesome organization From Privilege to Progress. And we will be sharing more in the chat, all of these different organizations that are joining us today, links to the websites and so much more. So feel free to check them out as you are listening along and after today's program. We're also joined by Joseph Canaria, a board member for Act to Change, a nonprofit organization working to address bullying and harassment in the AAPI community, and Carrie Okubo, who is the social media director for #HateIsAVirus, a nonprofit organization that works to mobilize the AAPI community and allies to dismantle racism and hate. But before we begin with our set questions for our panelists and in this roundtable discussion for the next hour or so, I would like to share that the topics of previous SCU Listens and Learns conversations have truly led us to this moment today. So back in October, we were joined by Dolores Huerta and Luis Valdez, who spoke about their personal journeys as activists and their connections to the broader political context as we were heading into the presidential election in November. In February, we were joined by Ava Patterson and Anthony Romero, who spoke about their lifelong activism and the need for hope. And last month in April, we were joined by Helen Zia, who discussed Asian American activism and its connections to the broader social, political, and cultural issues that we've seen. All of these conversations have emphasized the importance of multiracial and multicultural coalition building, and today's theme, solidarity in action. So today's conversation is simply another step in fostering dialogue among the communities that we all belong to so that we may increase understanding that whether we are discussing our personal or political lives, whether we're discussing the need for coalitions or the need to continue the struggle for a broader movement of social change, we all have a role to play, no matter how we identify or what generation we may come from. So today we continue discussing solidarity in action as we uplift all of the communities that we are part of and care about, and make sure that we show up together to create systemic solutions together. So with that, I want to hand it over to our panelists for our opening question. Thinking of solidarity in action, what does solidarity mean to you? And how do your personal identities affect how you show up for this work? And I'll just hand it over to whoever feels compelled to answer that question first.
Thanks, Joanna. I'll start. Thank you so much for having us. Really, really excited to be here. I love the way that you pronounce certain words. I want to be able to train my tongue to just be able to switch. So I love that. I think it's so beautiful. I was thinking about that question on preparing for this, and solidarity means to me I think it's a much deeper meaning that I see a lot of people using today. I think of it as this South African philosophy called Ubuntu, UBUNTU, and that means I am because you are. And that is a really deep philosophy. It's being able to look at a person who you may not identify with culturally, racially, ethnically, or in any way, and seeing how our humanities are tied together. You know, in South Africa today wouldn't be the fun place to just go and visit had the entire world not stood up and denounced apartheid to help Nelson Mandela get out of jail and to dismantle that system. And that only happened because of that international pressure, and for people being able to see people from across the globe and say, I am because you are, because our freedoms are intertwined. When my education is better, your education was better. When my food source is better, your food source is better. And so to me, it is a really deep philosophy that goes beyond any type of identities, and just it's a literal shared humanity. And I think just me being a Black woman in America and also African, my parents are from Ghana, West Africa, and also being dark skinned, you know, I experienced a lot of racial aggression, a lot of microaggressions. And so it's very easy for me to empathize and sympathize with anyone else experiencing any kind of repression. And so I think from that, and coming from a long line of activists in my lineage, it just makes sense that I help other people because I know that it's going to improve my situation and my humanity as well. So I think it's really deep, and I think people need to think about that word when they use it.
Thank you so much for sharing. Yeah, and I love this idea of, it's deeper than our identities, right? That it's so much more than a simple answer. And I appreciate you for sharing your identities with all of us and your experience. So thank you. Anyone else want to take a swing at the question?
Yeah. So when I was like working and preparing for this event, I really took some time to really reflect on that. So same, Michelle. And I think to me, it really is about moving from aspiring allyship to being a co-conspirator in doing this work, and recognizing that moving from that space requires you to put some skin in the game. And what that will require is for you to learn and unlearn, be uncomfortable, but learning how to move past the discomfort, and really taking to heart when you're asked to listen and when you're asked to take action. And sometimes even when you're not being asked, to do the right thing. And so it's so much more kind of what we've seen so far, and what demonstrating solidarity looks like, especially the past year, has been very performative. It's been like the Black Square on Instagram. It's been the retweet of works from people of color, specifically women of color, and all these different things. But it's really going beyond that. And when push comes to shove, and really when it's time to put your head in the game, really doing it. And I think that's what really we're at this point now in our work towards liberation for all, and as our bodies and as everything going on in the world, it's time. And so I think it's really, to me, it's the moving from allyship to co-conspirator.
Yeah, definitely. And that's a term that I know many of our students here at Santa Clara University are really using and kind of making their own, that, we can have these conversations and talk in circles. And we've been talking for a long time, especially many of us who, may have firsthand experience with a lot of these issues, whether it's microaggressions like Michelle had talked about, or just historical oppression and marginalization in so many different ways. And it's time to be able to move past that, right? Like, yes, dialogue is so great. And yes, it's great to be able to have conversations, but I love how you said, you got to put skin in the game and show up and do the work. As hard and uncomfortable as we all know it is, you got to do it. That's the only way things will change. Carrie and Melissa, how do you all feel about solidarity, and how have your personal identities affected how you show up for this work?
Yeah, I think off of Joseph's point too, we hear the phrase, "Oh, we stand in solidarity," and it's like there's no such thing. You can't stand. Like we need to sprint in solidarity. We need to walk in solidarity together, and that's it's people working towards a common goal, which is to dismantle white supremacy, which is to combat indigeneity, and it is to just be and find our humanity and work together to improve the quality of life for all of us. And when I say all of us, I mean in America, I mean globally, because my favorite Yuri Kochiyama quote is, "We are all a part of one another," and so it's important to note that our liberation is entwined together. The struggles that other communities of color face is struggles that our community, the AAPI community, faces as well. And so, solidarity, we hear a lot of the phrases as, "Oh, there's no such thing as POC solidarity." But no, it's like the only reason why we're here is because of POC solidarity. There is, no Asian American activism without the Black community, without the Black community teaching us how to build power together, not only our community, but in terms of environmental justice, the LGBTQIA justice, and other communities of color as well. It happened through people of color joining together, learning from one another, sharing about, building, sharpening each other's tools. And I think my personal identity I don't know if it plays into it, but I identify as a 5th generation Japanese and Okinawan settler on Native Hawaiian land. And so for me, growing up in a community that was predominantly Asian, due to Asian settler colonialism, and then kind of moving to the continental US was interesting because I think I learned and experienced racism pretty late in life, kind of like a big culture shock. And I was like, oh, this is what people were talking about. And also not really knowing how to relate to my own community too. And realizing that, the Asian American community needs to find solidarity with one another as well. And so I think in doing this work, sometimes I feel like an outsider looking in, but also knowing that I'm very much rooted in community here. It's all about working together in our own communities, and then also working together with other communities as well.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing, Carrie. And another theme that has been popping up for us on campus, this notion of really trying to push ourselves outside of the American context. I think, a lot of times when we talk about social justice, racial justice, all of the justices, right? Environmental justice, human rights, we get so caught up in what it means in America and the United States. But this is an international and global issue, and we have to understand there are nuances depending upon the countries that we're a part of, our nationalities, so many other things. So I appreciate you for sharing that. Melissa, how does this feel like for you?
So I'd like to address the issue of identity and how that relates to solidarity for me personally, and our origin story for our organization, the day Michelle and I met in that Starbucks right down the street from where I am in Philadelphia, is, it was a moment for me as a middle-aged white woman where I felt that my race mattered in that situation. And that's the first time that I had felt that way. I had always thought of being white as the default in America, and anyone else as other for the most part. And I think that that's the way a lot of if we're going to speak about white Americans, that's the way a lot of white Americans feel. And the way that I feel about it in this journey that I've been on over the last 3 years that we've been doing this activism work and educating ourselves and our community with us is that if there's a part of your identity that you don't understand or examine or own, then what happens is then you're causing harm to yourself and to everyone around you inadvertently. So for me, understanding that my race had meaning to me and to everyone around me and in the way that I move through the world, I think that's so crucial. So if you're white in America, it's so important that you understand that your race has as much meaning as anyone else's racial identity. Because even though we all know that race is invented, essentially, that it's very real in the way that it affects everyone around us. So to me, solidarity comes when white Americans in particular, they examine their race, they examine what it means, and they understand how what they do affects everyone else around them.
Definitely. That internal reflection is so important. And I think a big barrier for many folks to be able to truly move forward in that co-conspiratorship that Joseph had mentioned, that, there's a lot of fragility, a lot of guilt, a lot of fear, of really coming to terms with how you think, really addressing your stereotypes and biases, but you got to do that hard work in order to push past. So, thinking and continuing to learn more about your story, Michelle and Melissa, for you all, what is a critical component that many people may miss in order to move their allyship and advocacy into action? And maybe talk a little bit more about that story back at Starbucks.
I think what you just said is the exact critical piece that's missing, which is that reflective part on where do my biases lie. It's very easy to just say, all right, I'm now an ally to the Black community. I'm now an ally to the AAPI community, but having no understanding of how you still hold those biases that you can bring into a room with you. If you don't address those biases, you walk into a room full of mostly Black people and you're still causing harm because you haven't been radically honest with yourself, looked in your blind spot to say, you know what have I been taught? What have I been conditioned to think? What are my beliefs? And how is it potentially problematic? I just actually had a discussion with a friend this morning online. She wanted to post something. She's a huge following. And she wanted to post something about being in solidarity with the Black community. And I overread it and I had to be honest with her. And I said, this is great, but the way that it was framed just kind of makes you seem like you're one of the good ones, which doesn't give other people a roadmap into how to actually do this work and actually become a better person. You only become a better person, like what Melissa said, when you address your biases, when you find out where you're causing harm and you take intentional action to create new thoughts and create new beliefs. And through those new thoughts and new beliefs, you'll have new actions and actually become a better person. So I think what I was seeing a lot, which is what Joseph talked about, a lot of that performative, we saw a lot of performative action over the summer, over the whole past year. And what I felt was missing was people being able to just be like, you know what? I have biases. Like one of my best friends is Vietnamese. I would give her my kidney tomorrow, and I mean that in the most literal sense. It has not stopped me from having a racially biased thought about Asian people at times in my life. And it's so important that we're able to be honest with ourselves and the people around us and say, listen, this is what I used to think. This is the work that I have work that I've done to overcome these biases. And this is how I've grown and what I've learned to help people around see that, be inspired by it, be motivated by it. And again, give people a roadmap to see how this is actually done to do better.
Thank you so much. And Melissa, anything else to add?
Yeah, I think our goal in our organization is to continue the conversation that we started that day that became an international conversation about not just what racism looks like today or what it can look like today, but about what privilege looks like today. And I think people get all sort of tied up when we talk about this idea of privilege, but really we're just talking about the barriers that you don't have to face if you are born with a certain color skin in this country. So we learned what privilege looks like. What my privilege looks like is that I could amplify Michelle's voice on social media and people would listen to me because they said, oh, someone looks like you said it. And that is the problem. And it's also part of the solution. So what we commit to is having a conversation, talking about race and racism. We have all been conditioned to not talk about it. It is one of those things that you say, oh, I can't talk about it. I might say the wrong thing. I might offend someone. I don't know what to say. I don't know if it's my place. But for us, it is so crucially important that we model the conversation, that we have the conversation, because no problem was ever fixed without putting it out in the open. As Michelle said, getting radically honest with yourself and with those around you. I mean, over the last 3 years I've been doing this work, I have screwed up a million times. And that is part of the work. You mess up, you listen, you correct your behavior, and you keep moving. But what matters is that you don't stop. So I highly encourage anyone out there listening today, whatever question you have for us, share it with us, put it in the Facebook Live, on YouTube. We will answer any of your questions very honestly. The very first question I had when someone interviewed me after the Starbucks incident was, is it okay if I say the word Black? I literally had that question because I didn't know. Did I have to say African American? Was I insulting someone by saying Black? I didn't know. So there is no question too small or too simple. So we hope you'll continue the conversation with us.
Yeah, thank you so much. And that's such a good reminder for folks who are tuning in. I know we've had some folks, popping into the chat as, again, just reminding folks that if you have questions, feel free to ask. This is definitely the space to be able to get your questions answered, to engage in that dialogue. As much as it seems like we're just having a conversation with this group, we're having a conversation with everyone. So feel free to pop those questions into the chat. So now I'm thinking, Joseph, about your work, as a board member for Act to Change. In your perspective, what does it mean to act to change? And maybe what does that look like for you in your daily work for that organization?
Yeah, so at Act to Change, our goal is to end bullying and harassment for AAPI youth. But beyond that and broader than that, it's to allow AAPI youth to live out their fullest truth in their most authentic selves and really embrace their sense of humanity that's often diminished when it comes to the world that we live in, right? This racist world that we all have to navigate through. And so when it means for me to Act to Change as an organization, our goal is to create communities and learning environments that foster that creates those opportunities, that promotes those healthy ways in which AAPI youth are able to explore those different paths around who they want to eventually be, right? So that's why we're able to, a lot of our efforts has really been able to show youth that look at all these people who have these awesome AAPI influencers, celebrities, politicians who have been able to live out their dreams, and here's the advice that they're sharing. We're able to provide programs to teach parents and children how to have those tough conversations around anti-Blackness and the roles in which the AAPI community contributes to that. We're able to have these programs around how do we dismantle the model minority myth and the ways in which white supremacy informs all of those different things, as well as us recognizing that being AAPI is not a monolith, right? Where there's so many other intersections that informs the ways in which your race ethnicity shows up in the world and how the world sees you and vice versa. But so that's what we're able to provide and host pride events for LGBTQ youth. That's we're able to, for me, I'm also a proud fat activist and recognizing there's so many different identities. I'm queer, I'm an immigrant. There's so many things that come into play in that. What I love about Act to Change and our mission is it allows youth to figure that out, but they're not able to if they're currently experiencing harassment and bullying and all those different things. So we're trying to take those pieces apart and dismantle those one piece at a time. So to me, Act to Change is really about your demonstrated commitment to allow folks to live their truest self and to be who they really want to be. And that requires all the hard work that we've been talking about the past half hour here and being introspective and figuring out what is those next steps.
Thank you so much for sharing. I love that, message of authenticity. And that's something that I know for us in our office and here at Santa Clara University, we try to promote, because you can't necessarily show up as your best self if you're not showing up as your complete self, all of those intersecting identities. And I love the work that you all are doing, particularly with youth. A lot of these conversations, of course, we're having this in a university setting. Many of us are of age and adults, but it's so important to have those conversations honestly, if you could do it right out of the womb, that would be great, because, these things happen immediately, right? We are all confronted with race, ethnicity, gender, class in so many different ways. So it's great to know that there's so many different resources that are helping our youth who unfortunately are going through similar things, right? Microaggressions, cyberbullying, again, harassment, all of those different issues. So that's so wonderful. Thank you for sharing. Carrie, so thinking about hashtag hate virus, as the director of social media, how have you used social media to uplift the call to action that hate is a virus has? The call to action for the organization is to raise awareness, to educate, and to fundraise. So what does using social media look like in order to do all of those?
Yeah, so prior to Hate is a Virus even being an organization, it was never meant to be an organization. Hate is a Virus just started as a simple campaign, and it really started with me and our founder, Michelle, seeing the news, seeing all the the viral videos of people in our community being attacked, and really just seeing the harmful rhetoric from our former America's former president. And so we were just crying on the dinner table. We were like, okay, what can we do? And so initially we were like, oh, maybe we can do a food crawl to help small businesses. And then we did one, but then we had LA lockdown the next day. And so we were like, oh, okay, we have to pivot. So how can we best serve our immediate community, which is what it was meant for? We just wanted our community to just share their stories and to know that they're not alone in their feelings of being scared, of being misunderstood. And so, for me, I'm the first person in my family to speak out against racism and to speak for my community. And I know that's the case for a lot of Asian and Pacific Islanders as well. And so I came up with the hashtag Hate is a Virus, and we just asked people to share their stories and to speak up. And it was me behind my phone affirming them and saying, yes, like you are heard. And then, in the coming weeks, it really resonated with other people in our community, not only Asians, but our accomplices as well, speaking up for our community. And then it became a movement, and really what we did from then on is to equip people with the right tools to speak, whether that's in infographics, kind of combating, having talking points to say to, whether it was trolls, whether it was family members, whether it was your friends, on how to have these conversations. And since then, as an organization, we've been able to really amplify other organizations that have been doing this work for decades. Organizations that are too busy, saving the world to put into marketing. And so what we do is we partner with them any opportunity that we can to help raise awareness. But we also know that raising awareness is where you start, not where you finish. And sharing infographics and the information that you consume is the starting point. And we really want to push people as much as possible to take action. And so, through social media, aside from, awareness and education, we also want to just put out training programs. We do virtual events as well, but different ways to, mobilize and have community and be in community when we are, socially isolated from one another. But I think that through social media, it's a great place to start. It's the easiest place for people to share their stories and for other people to be heard and for people to see them. But also we want people to take action, and we have our Community Action Fund where we are raising funds to go directly to other community organizations that have been doing this work. And also using our platform to amplify those organizations as well. So yeah, social media is the beginning, and we want to push people towards, this lifelong work of taking action.
Yeah, that's so great. Thank you for sharing. I love this notion of, just shared knowledge, shared action, shared resources. It's such an important moment to remember that we're not in this alone. There's so many awesome people and organizations who are working together. Again, this notion of solidarity and this idea that we all have a role to play. For some of us, it may be posting on social media. For some of us, it may be, doing workshops. For some of us, it may just mean, I'm just going to have a conversation with my friends or my family. But all of us have a role to play. So it's so great that, Hate is a Virus is really looking at all of those different roles that we can all play in moving forward in all of this work together. So again, just a quick reminder for folks, if you have any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat, but we'll keep going with our planned questions. And this is open to everyone. So really thinking about, this notion of multicultural, multiracial coalition building, what are some of the challenges that you've seen or personally faced when trying to engage in that coalition building? And in your perspective, how can we effectively work through those challenges to create change? So again, open to anyone who feels compelled to share.
I haven't thought this question out thoroughly, but what I've seen, what I've been experienced personally is when you're trying to build that coalition, people who are in marginalized groups still tend to be focusing on the things that we're still doing to one another and not recognizing that those are individual acts, right? Like something that a Black person does to an Asian person, it doesn't require the entire Black community to speak out because that Black person is suffering from Stockholm syndrome. He's suffering from the system of oppression that has warped his mind, to do something terrible to another human being. But and I find that a lot of those conversations are happening, and it's causing this tension and not allowing us to recognize that we are all in this fight together. And anyone that does anything to another marginalized person, they're an outlier. They're an outlier, and there's someone who hasn't received that message. And again, I really believe that sometimes when you can be so bogged down by that oppression, you do develop that Stockholm syndrome, where you start to identify with your oppressor and start to act in ways that oppress other people, which is why I said that it's so important for us to get radically honest with ourselves and say, what am I doing to other people around me? How have I been conditioned? And put that shame and that guilt aside. And I think that we need to always remember that, that those people are outliers, and there's so many more people trying to build these relationships and trying to build a solidarity and trying to work together than not. And that's what we need to focus on if we really want to make a change. And it's always important to remember, what is the end goal? Is what I'm saying going to further the movement, or is it gonna take us back? Is it gonna regress us? Is what I'm saying helpful in this situation, or is it gonna cause more tension? So I think we all, when we're trying to build these, our solidarity, it's important that we just be really reflective of the energy that we're bringing into the room, and remember that the goal is to end white supremacy, and that needs to be the focus at all times.
And such a good reminder of, main understanding that there's a balance between individual versus generalization. And I think a lot of times when we have these conversations or see things happening, we're so quick to be like, well, all of those people, all of that identity. And, we really need to be able to look at it again in that individual sense that, well, that's that person who did something, said something that doesn't. And even when we speak up for individuals, I know something that we talk about a lot in our office, when we share about the Black experience, or for me, I'm Black and Latina, I'm not speaking for all Black and Latina people. I'm just speaking for myself, and really trying to get folks to understand that if you want to, engage in this work, you have to understand that there's times when we may be generalizing in terms of speaking for everyone, but most of the time it's an individual experience, and you have to have those individual dialogues.
There's one other thing I want to add, because we talked about how this is global, and I just spent 6 months in Ghana. That's where my family's from, and I've had my own relatives of mine not understand really 100% what I do. I've had a problematic family member almost mock me for what I was doing with my activism here in America, and I said, Auntie, our problems are intertwined. The problems that are still happening in Africa are directly because of white supremacy and colonization. The same people that were oppressing your long lost cousins and relatives and neighbors in Africa took them from our place and put them there and are still oppressing them. And when we address what's happening there, we can very easily see the ties in what is happening in Africa. People think that they're not related, and I see the impact of white supremacy. I saw it every day in Africa. I saw skin bleaching happening like it was a normal thing. I saw people wanting so badly to act like the West and be like Americans or be like the UK. And that's internalized anti-Blackness. That's internalized white supremacy, even across an ocean in an almost entirely Black country. So it's important to remember that, again, these things are not just happening here in America. They're happening globally. They just might look a little bit differently. And when we can make those connections and make those ties, we can start to mobilize in other parts of the world. You know, when George Floyd was murdered, 18 other countries also protested against police brutality because they saw how it was connected to what was happening in their countries as well. So it's important that we also remember that, you know, this multicultural is also across oceans and in different countries.
Thank you so much for that connection, and so important to make those connections, Michelle. Any other thoughts on some of the challenges that you all have faced in this multicultural, multiracial coalition building?
I can add something to what Michelle said. It sort of might feel like it's going on a tangent, but you know, there are terms when I go back to this idea of privilege, and we keep talking about white supremacy, and I think that the learning curve is so steep for people, for particularly white Americans, because we hear words like privilege and white supremacy and we think, oh, well, I'm not a white supremacist, or I don't have privilege because I grew up poor, or whatever they say, which is, those are generally deflections from actually having the conversation. But, you know, we have to remember that white supremacy is a system that was put into place to exploit people for money. And it is the very basis. And if we're just talking about American society, it's the basis of American society. So, so when we talk about that, we have to think about how that flows through everything we think and feel and see and know. And particularly the way that we're taught, at least when I talk about my traditional education, and I know Michelle will talk about hers, we're not taught history as common facts. We're taught through the lens of the oppressors, through the lens of the victors. And what that does is that makes us all see things through this lens of white supremacy. And a lot of times we don't even know we're doing it. So it's just so important that we understand what we mean when we talk about those terms, that we don't shut down immediately, and that we're inquisitive, that we say, okay, what does that really mean? And how does that affect me, whether I know it's affecting me or whether I don't know it's affecting me? And I think that comes from reflection, looking internally, questioning things. It's when you have a thought, say, why do I have this thought? Where does this thought come from? And being curious. And that is so important. And, you know, I mean, I'm not going to speak for all white people, but I can speak from my own personal experience growing up white in America. And, you know, there's so many things that that I never thought about, I never considered, that weren't even in my realm of my day-to-day life. And that it is so important that we widen our view and that we understand how we're a part of this coalition, because it requires all of us. And it particularly requires the people who hold the power and privilege to understand how they're contributing to the systems of oppression that are in place, that keep replicating themselves in every single way.
Definitely. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing. And I think, you know, it connects back to Michelle's point of this need for, you know, understanding that these are global issues, you know, having conversations with individuals who may not look like you or may not have similar lived experiences. So one, you're not living in a bubble, but two, you're able to make those connections, right? So that you understand, wow, this is so much bigger than what I may think or what I may see in my everyday, and you're able to push past that. Joseph, I know that you had unmuted. I think you wanted to share too.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo those same sentiments. And I think really we all both brought up this idea and this need that we all need to be able to do the work. That includes people of color. That I think that oftentimes we get lumped in as BIPOC, and that gives us a pass to like, that means we know anything and everything about what it means to be about a person of color in all ways and shapes and forms. And I think it's one thing where I mentioned earlier, moving from allyship to co-conspirator requires you to be able to make mistakes and not being afraid to make mistakes and learning from those mistakes. And so that's something that I myself personally working on. In my work to be a co-conspirator with the Black Lives Matter movement, in my work to be a co-conspirator for the liberation of Palestinians happening right now, when everything happening is all tied in together. And when we're doing this multicultural, multiracial, like racial justice work, this coalition building, oftentimes, I see it's like, okay, you're BIPOC, welcome into the space, you get it. But I by no means will never understand what it means to be a woman of color in this world, in America, anywhere. And just because I'm brown does not mean I understand what it then means to be Black or anything. And so I think really like unlearning this assumption that just because you're BIPOC, you get it. And so I think there's a lot of those challenges, and that we're really trying to acknowledge and unpack, and solidarity, coalition build amongst one another is really required in all of this. And so that's what I wanted to add.
Yeah, thank you so much, Joseph. I mean, we always joke in the Black community, all skin folk ain't kinfolk. We sometimes are hurt the most by the people who look exactly like us and who are our family members, as Michelle said, or friends, or people who you look at them and you're like, wait, but don't you get it? And not everybody gets it. That is not the assumption. So something that we have to remind all of ourselves that, we all have work to do in some way, whether we are part of communities of color or non-communities of color. So yeah. Carrie, anything to add in terms of, challenges in working with multicultural, multiracial coalition building?
Yes, I think that the biggest thing is just we haven't learned enough from one another. We also haven't really been given the opportunity to learn from one another. I didn't learn anything really about, aside from the civil rights movement, nothing really about Black history, nothing really about Latinx history, nothing about Native American history. I learned a little bit about sugar-coated Native Hawaiian history, but we have these like textbook things that we haven't learned enough about our communities, and also we haven't learned enough about each other. And so when that happens, we let these generalizations and stereotypes that come from the news, TV shows, biases that our grandparents and our elders have passed on to us, that have since we were young, and we've held these biases within us as we've grown up into our own individuals. And so we have all of these different stereotypes, and it comes with being in community with one another and actually having dinner, opening our homes when it's safe to other people of color and to people in your own community as well, to learn about our different experiences, and knowing that, I'm Japanese Okinawan. I have a very different experience from other Japanese Okinawans as well. And so it's us kind of like breaking down those stereotypes too, to further like learn about one another, and really being in community with one another. And I think the biggest thing is by joining other organizations, actually listening, having these conversations too, and it starts in your home and it starts in your immediate community, because that's how you break down your internal biases first. It's me having lunch with my Black friends and saying what's going on, with both of our communities, because we're both hurting. And so this, it's having conversations with our grandparents too, and challenging, because my grandparents will say some racist things for all communities of color, including our own. And so it's challenging that with, all the education that I'm doing and all the learning and internal work that I'm doing, and communicating that with my immediate community, because that's how we're actually going to further and make an impact. And so I think that rather than doing all this performative activism and sharing infographics and stuff, that's not really how we break down these stereotypes. I think it's when it's being in community with one another, and then it's also like sharing what we've known with people in our immediate community as well.
Yeah, such a great point, Carrie. And I know, a lot of what we've been talking about sounds really simple in terms of the answer and the solution. I know when we have conversations with our campus community, folks are asking, well, what do I do? Give me tangible action items. And it's just this simple, right? Have conversations, have dialogues, get to know people, travel if you can, just engage with one another, because as much as it very much is complicated, a lot of the issues that we are dealing with, but the solutions sometimes are not that complicated, that something very small can have a very big and meaningful action. So yeah, definitely something to remind folks that just have these dialogues, get to know one another, and hopefully that will be a good step forward. But we actually have a question from our chat, so it's so awesome to hear from our viewers. And so this is a general question for any of the panelists. Feel free to chime in. But one of the viewers wanted to see, what are your opinions on call out culture? And this is something that has been a very common theme for our students this past year. Calling out versus calling in. Is it good? Is it bad? So if you all want to share your experiences, what do you feel about call out culture?
I can go because I just had a conversation about this, and I don't really call it call out culture. I like to shift to call in culture, and to not really single out individuals publicly if it can be done privately. And so I understand there's a trend, and also seeing how call out culture and cancel culture doesn't work. It's ineffective. And it would be effective if communities are collectively saying this is wrong. But when it's individuals and we get into these little nitty gritty conversations, it becomes more about the individual than the actual problem and the actual harm it caused. And so we say call in culture, and in our infographics, and in just basic conversations, we'll just say things that we've seen from our community, and this is how we're combating it. And so it's more, and knowing that this work involves an immense amount of humility, an immense amount of empathy, and knowing that we're all in different stages of this journey, and being able to kind of meet people where they're at is a skill that I'm still learning, and I think that we're all kind of learning how to move forward together. And so I think that in terms of call out culture, I don't think it's as effective as calling people in, saying what's on your mind, what's in your heart, personally, and sharing your own personal stories on how to combat the actual issues at hand rather than the actual individuals.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Go for it. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I just definitely wanted to echo those same sentiments, Carrie, in terms of shifting it from call out to call in, because our goal in racial justice work is to unlearn white supremacy, right? Like, that's been colonized in our consciousness. It's so ingrained in our behaviors and ideologies and our views and thoughts, and calling out doesn't provide the opportunity to learn and grow. Calling in gives folks to reflect, the opportunity to take a step back and really, like you said, Kara, to meet them where they're at. And calling out is more about then saying that you as an individual are wrong, and that there's like shame upon you. Like, those are things, right? That never leads then to what you said was harmful. It was hurtful to these communities. Can we talk about like why you said that? Where is that coming from? And where did you learn that? And let's really work together to unlearn that. So I think that's the difference, that in our racial justice work, I've rarely seen calling out as being effective, right? It targets their character rather than their actions. And when their character's on the line, they're not willing to grow and learn. They're not going to, they double down. They really then just, they see as like, so when I tried, and then look what happened. And so it's really all about giving folks grace and just the opportunity to, like I mentioned before, make mistakes, but learn from that.
Yeah, I want to echo everything they said, especially something Carrie said about doing it publicly versus privately. And I think that when people do it publicly, it's more about what Joseph said, which is about ego, and it's about wanting to shame a person and wanting to make someone feel guilty. And I tested it out myself. I saw an activist posting that I thought was incredibly harmful. I thought it was very counterintuitive to our mission of dismantling white supremacy. They have a huge following. And I was like, you know what? Let me DM them and ask them if it's okay. Is it okay that I address what you did on your last post? They said okay. They initially got really defensive and asked me why I was like defending a white woman. And I said, listen, I'm not defending a white woman. But what I'm saying is, when you publicly attack her like this, do you think that you are going to get what you wanted from her, which is a conversation? What you wanted in the first place is not what you're going to get anymore, because like Joseph said, you're attacking her character. She's never going to respond to you. And now, even if she does, she's going to do it out of feeling guilt. She's going to do it out of trying to repair the reputation that was damaged about her. And she's not going to do it from a place of sincerity. So what's the point? And it's really important, like Joseph said, to extend some kind of grace, because at some point, all of us on this panel didn't know anything. At some point, I'm very similar to Carrie, where I understood these things very late in my life. And at one point, we all were babies and knew nothing. So can you imagine if someone jumped down our throat and called us out publicly on a public forum? We would probably still be in that hole, because we'd be like, look what happens when you try to do something good. So I agree with what everybody's saying. I think that we need to, as activists, if we're going to put ourselves in this space to educate people and to lead people, then we need to lead by example. And I think some of the calling out can be really harmful and completely the opposite of what we're trying to do.
I would like to add something also, please. And it's just, I agree with everyone. I will say that I have, you make mistakes, you say things that aren't, exactly, you say things that can be harmful to people. And I've been, called out in comments on a post or whatever. And what I would say is, yes, I think privately is the better way. And I think that very often, like, this idea of like publicly piling on someone is counterproductive. But I will say that if you are somebody that has done something that causes harm inadvertently, and someone calls you out on it publicly, in a comment or on a post or whatever that is that, just take a step back and remember that it is not remember who you are, that it's not an assault on you as a person, that you have said something or done something that could be harmful to people, and have a little bit of that humility. It is hard to take that in when you've made a mistake. It's very difficult. But I will say that I've seen people who have been called out publicly and who have handled it in ways that set a model for other people of how you correct a behavior, how you take responsibility for something that you did, and how you move forward. I've also seen people double down and triple down and quadruple down and make things worse. So as much as I don't agree with the pile-on calling out publicly in that way, I don't think that we're going to stop it necessarily. And what I do think is that we have to understand that if that happens, that you have to respond to it in a way that sets an example and that shows how you can acknowledge a mistake and move forward.
Definitely. And this is actually a great segue to one of the other questions that we have from one of our viewers. What strategies or advice would you give for engaging in conversations with either close family or friends who don't see the harmful nature of their thoughts and actions, especially if they have expressed an unwillingness to have a conversation in the past? And this is open to everyone.
I like to start with like a current event or like a conversation starter. Is how I'm thinking of how I address things with my family. And it's, it starts the conversation. It also starts with literally every single time something problematic is said, just calling it out like immediately. And even if they're unwilling to have that conversation, just knowing that like it's like, that's wrong. I think that what you said is wrong. And it causes them to reflect. And I've noticed, with like my grandfather, who's very, tough, very stubborn person. Like he'll stop saying certain things around me, but also I'm making sure to follow it up. But also knowing that if somebody says something harmful or offensive around you to another, group of color or another marginalized group, that phrase or that harmful word is meant for you, because they think that you accept that. They think that, oh, you get it, whether it's a joke, whether it's like a, just like a side remark or things. They say it for you. They think that you'll receive that. And so there's so much power in saying like, that's messed up. And that says that I don't tolerate that. And it really causes them to reflect on why, because they're like, oh, I thought you were like this, I thought it was okay subconsciously. And for you to say that's not okay, that was offensive and this is why, has a lot more impact than people think.
I just want to go off of that. We actually had these racism interrupters on our page. What she said is one of them. That's not okay with me, because a lot of people feel like they can't interrupt racism when they hear it or see it because they don't know what to say in the moment. So we give really simple phrases, that's not okay with me. I didn't realize you thought that way. You can ask the person to explain themselves. A lot of the times people don't even understand where these thoughts come from. I know Melissa has a story where she was speaking with an aunt who had a really racist thought, and she asked her aunt where that thought came from. And she was like, I don't know, which goes back to questioning our beliefs, questioning our thoughts. It can be really difficult to have those conversations with family. I agree that it's important to address it in the moment. I always say no one wakes up one day and decides that they're going to be violent towards someone else. What happens is they're not being checked for a very long time. Like for years, they say something, no one says anything. And what happens in our brains is that our brains say, what I just did was okay because there was no consequence. And that actually builds into like an actual ideology. It builds into a belief system. It's like a snowball that just keeps rolling. And then one day you actually go and act out those jokes that aren't really jokes, because no one's ever checked you your entire life. And even if someone doesn't respond the way that you want them to respond in that moment, I guarantee that if enough people check people, especially in their family, maybe when they're laying at night, they're laying in bed at night someday, they're like, all right, Carrie's checked me like 5 times on this. Maybe it's time that I actually think about this and reflect on it. So I think even if you don't know the issues enough to explain why it's wrong, it's just important to interrupt it, to get that person to stop and think and reflect. It's also important to realize that there's some people who you're never going to get to, who are going to go into their grave being racist. And sometimes you have to accept that and just build that boundary and say, you know what, we're not going to see eye to eye. And so I'm not going to have these conversations about this with you. And, please just don't engage with me. It's important that we save some of that energy for the people who are at least willing to have a conversation.
Definitely such great points. We also have another question from one of our viewers, somewhat of a really heavy question. I'm interested to see what the answer will be. How can liberated ethnic studies, so as a discipline, build multiracial coalitions, especially today with, some of you had mentioned the attacks on Palestine, but just attacks on the entire ethnic studies discipline in all of our communities that we are part of, whether it's Chicano, Chicana, Native, African, Asian studies. So from your perspective, how can we better teach multiracial coalitions to our ethnic studies students and other students? Open to anyone. Again, it's a tough question right in the last few minutes.
Yeah, so to me, I think it kind of goes back to our other question, like what the challenges around being multiracial and multicultural. It's to really be able to build those bridges across our communities. It's to create those outreach opportunities to uplift each other's voices, and that when something happens, like the Atlanta shootings, for example, like it wasn't then don't expect, to put the emotional labor and like the psychological labor and all these different things on the Asian community to have to then speak out. out. This is time for then your own allyship to step in and speak out on their behalf, all the different things. And it's really all about when Ubuntu, attack on one of us is attack on all of us, and recognizing then if this is your opportunity to step in and demonstrate your co-conspiratorship, then that's the time to do so. And so when you're building these multiracial coalitions, it's really, attend those outreach events, attend those things that are hosting it. It's not just, even though it's just for the Chicano office, that means everyone should go and attend that. If there's a Native American Indigenous powwow in November, everyone should need to come and attend that. If there's something for May, AAPI Heritage Trust, everyone needs to come together and support one another, and recognizing that our end goal is to end white supremacy, and as white supremacists, one of their goals is to continue to separate us and to create these barriers, these imaginary barriers to really keep us apart. But ways in which we can work to address that is to come together. And so a lot easier said than done. And oftentimes as BIPOC folks, we're comfortable in the spaces we're in. But as an opportunity then on college campuses is to really be able to do and learn things that you wouldn't have otherwise. It's not necessarily your identity, but that's okay. Go learn and go be that relationship build, bridge build, and all those different things. That's really integral in racial justice work.
Yeah, definitely. Such a great answer. Yeah, Carrie.
I just kind of wanted to add on to that too. I think also for ethnic studies in this coalition building, to go straight to the sources of oppression that all ethnicities, all people of color have felt. It all ties into white supremacy, colonialism, imperialism, and capitalism. And so I think that as we address how these systems affect different communities of color, different cultures, different countries differently, but also it's the same source. It's the same source that oppresses us. And so I think that going straight to the source, going straight to the systems is how we kind of find that connection, because knowing that, we've all been impacted by white supremacy, whether you name it or not. The different things it falls under. It's tokenization. It's the jokes. It's police brutality. It's immigration. It's all these different things that play into one another, which is how this collective cultural sharing happens. And also I think that going beyond just the history. I feel like ethnic studies, a lot of times it stops at the history. And the theories of culture and things like that, but going deeper into how these communities have been oppressed, who and what have they been oppressed by, so people understand how those systems are affecting our daily lives today. And so I think that's also how ethnic studies can continue to build coalitions.
Thank you so much for your answers, Joseph and Carrie. Definitely awesome. And hopefully for all of our students in the audience, you can take that and run with it. I love Melissa's shirt, just show up, right? Just literally be in these spaces, meet these awesome people, have these conversations. Before we end out today, my final question for everyone, it's been a very tough year, and we continue to deal with so much in so many different ways, but maybe just share one or two things that keep you coming back to this work and keep you just, sane and healthy. How are you taking care of yourself? Maybe just a last word of wisdom for our viewers. So I'm going to start with Michelle. What is it for you that keeps you going?
I've started doing a lot of meditating. It is very effective. When I feel something rising in my body, any kind of anxiety or anger, I literally just start counting my breaths. I count in for 5 or 6, and I hold, and I breathe out, and I hold. And you will, before you know it, you are back to square one, and you don't even feel your heart anymore. And it is very effective, not just for calming the mind, but it's also good for your immune system. It's very important that we stay healthy right now. We're still in a pandemic. And what also helps me continue to keep going is that I just remind myself that all of these systems are eventually going to fall. One day or another, it's going to happen, because if you just look at the history of the entire world, nothing ever stays the same. Because this white supremacy has been built, it can be torn down, and that gives me a lot of hope. It gives me hope because I think in March, Melissa and I had maybe 10,000 followers on our Instagram, and now we have 550 14,000 followers. So that really made me hopeful that a lot of people wanted to learn. They wanted to do something about it. They're ready for that information. Right in the very beginning, Joseph said, now is the time, and now is that time. I think a lot of people recognize that. So I just get really hopeful that, even if we don't see it in our lifetimes, when we're out and we cross over, I hope that one day we will look back down on earth and see that all the work that we have done will come to fruition. And I believe that 100% that one day this will be all dismantled.
Yes, definitely. That positive outlook is so important. And taking that breath and meditating. I love that. Melissa, what keeps you going with all of this hard work that we all have to do?
Well, I will say that every conversation that we have, whether, it's at a university or corporation or wherever it is that we can see change happen in real time with people asking questions and commenting and joining us in conversation. And that day in Starbucks, I mean, it was a simple thing that we did together. When we go back and we talk about solidarity and doing things together, a simple thing, just two regular people, no academics or trainers or anything, did together. And then Starbucks closed 8,000 stores for anti-bias training. And there was a international conversation about what racism and privilege looks like. So every one of us right where we are can make change, every single one of us. So that's what keeps me hopeful. And just to piggyback on that last question we got about ethnic studies is that we're getting this pushback, this hard pushback on ethnic studies, on critical race theory. And that tells us that what we're doing is working because we're making progress. And as soon as we start making progress, we're going to get that hard pushback. So that just means keep going.
Yes, definitely, for sure. Joseph, what does this look like for you to keep moving forward?
Yeah, I need to constantly remind myself, like, the arc of justice is long. It's long and winding, and recognizing that change isn't going to happen overnight. And, and keeping that belief, as Michelle said, that at the end of the day, these systems will be dismantled. And that, our days are long and, things are, you really see progress. And if anything, you just get bombarded with so much just pain and harm, but recognizing that you have to continue doing the work, and in doing so, recognizing that self-care is a right and not a privilege, and that self-care in and of itself is a tool of revolution, because white supremacy and all the systems expect you to burn out. They expect you to bow out of the movement. And so really recognizing that you don't have to work for self-care. Self-care is not a reward. And that really recognizing that taking care of yourself is a right. And there's no shame or guilt and whatever that means to you, because you're expected to burn out in this work. That's what the system's been designed to do. And so take care of yourself in any which way that you can, and really embracing that holistically.
Yes, definitely. Unapologetic. That is probably my theme for this past year. And Carrie, what does it look like for you to continue showing up for this work every day?
Yeah, I think first is just community, the community that we've built and the community that the immediate community that surrounds me. A lot of the times I'm the youngest person in a lot of these groups that I'm in. And so I say that I am the product of the labor of women of color around me, like who have poured into me, both, mentors and ancestors. And so I think that it is them that keep me going. There's one amazing woman, her name is Kathy Masaoka, who has fought for reparations for the Japanese American community and now working and organizing for HR 40. And she says that in a call, she was like, I can't believe we're here. Like, I can't believe our community's here. And so I was like, wow, because I think we have so much work to do. And so just hearing that, she's dedicated over 50 years to the liberation of all people of color. And so, for her to say, like, I can't believe we're here. I can't believe we're talking about these things. I can't believe that, the model minority myth is being, brought to light and showing how it is a myth and how it's false, and and all these topics. She's like, I can't believe we're here. I'm glad. We should keep pushing. And so just knowing that there is progress that has been made, and yeah, it's like the older generations, and it's also the younger generations too, that we've seen really taking action and saying that, like, you guys messed this up for all of us, and so we're taking things in our own hands, and we're going. And so being able to kind of shape and cultivate and amplify those voices. I peruse TikTok, and I'm on TikTok a lot, and so hearing all these like 16-year-olds talk about like systemic racism and all of that, I'm like, whoa, that is amazing. What am I doing? I need to do more. I need to educate myself more too. So it's the generations before and after, and also the community that surrounds me immediately.
Yes, definitely. Such a great note to end on, that, this isn't just multiracial and multicultural, but it's also intergenerational. It's global. Again, we all have a role to play and a part to play. So I just want to thank you all, Carrie, Melissa, Joseph, Michelle. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. It was great to just learn and listen and just reflect on everything that you've talked about. Thank you to all of our viewers for tuning in as well. We also just want to emphasize, again, this call to action, that the conversation doesn't stop here, and once you log off, continue to engage, continue to learn and listen and reflect on your own. We will be sharing a couple of resources with all of our registered attendees after this afternoon, so feel free to check out that. And then if you are a student here at Santa Clara University, we invite you to join this great group again this afternoon at 5:30 p.m. PDT to be able to engage in a more intimate one-on-one conversation as students, and continue talking about activism and all of the awesome stuff that we've started talking about earlier today. So thank you again, everyone. I hope you all continue to stay well, stay safe, stay healthy, and thanks so much. We'll see you soon. Thanks again, speakers. Virtual applause. Thank you.